EMT paramedics of Reddit. What last words did you hear that will stick with you forever? Tell that butthole I finally did something right. The last words of a 23-year-old woman to her father. We were responding to her suicide attempt called in by her roommate. She lost consciousness as we loaded her in the back of the ambulance. 3 minutes later she seized, coded and died in transit. It was week 3 of my new EMT job, just last year. I feel what she meant. There was a moment in my life where I'd say the same. My father stood over me and whispered jump 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 as my mother held me after my attempt to jump out of the window. He was drunk. I don't know if he remembers it, but I sure do. 911 operator here. 2 weeks ago I had a lady give her address and just said clean up the body before the kids get home and then hung up. She shot herself in the bathtub before help arrived. I can play it back in my brain like a recording. I have had at least half a dozen of these types of calls in an over 20-year career. This is the worst one yet. It wasn't my patient, but a fellow paramedics. He had a mid-30s age male who had injuries that didn't really give him much of a shot even if he would have been in the air when it happened. He looked at my friend and asked about the injuries. When my friend responded, he shrugged his shoulders and responded, at least it's not training. The man's optimism even in the face of death will never leave me. As far as myself, I haven't had anyone say anything profound, but I'm not sure the screams will ever go away. It's a terrible day for Rain. My uncle's sister told him to shut up because he was making her head hurt. She fell asleep after saying that and never woke up. Brain cancer. This scared me so much. My head always hurts, and when my head hurts so much I fall asleep. I'm scared of falling asleep now. EMT, second week on the job. Man in his 50s was in distress. Some kind of cardiac event we thought. He just looked our paramedic in the eye and like a small child said "oh," and he slumped back on the gurney. It was the tone, the way he said it that made it stick with me. Like a 3-year-old who just spilled his juice. No last words, and it's taking me a lot to write this. We responded to a car fire from a collision with a semi-truck. When we got there, I can still hear the passengers screaming. There is no worse feeling than knowing there's nothing you can do. It's also a sound I never want to hear again. There are only 2 ways I'm scared to die of, and burning is one of them. Yikes. Knew an EMT briefly. He told me about an old man who had gotten in a car crash. Drove over some water and his car flipped. He kept talking about how his daughter was a pose and asking who was going to help his grandson if he died. Dang. CSI. Tending to an elderly man who was shot in a home invasion. Points to his dresser and tells me to get the detective. Tells the detective, shoot those sobs with my gun. He died seconds later. The detective found a Taurus Raging Judge Magnum in the 3rd drawer. Goddamn, imagine living a long life, maybe raising a family, working for 40 plus years. You finally get to retire thinking about what's next. Maybe you decide to travel and see the world only to have some mother suckers break into your home and kill you over a few hundred to a few thousands bucks. Scumbags. From hospice. Patient's daughter caressing her mother's face in her final hours and said through tears, "You're my little baby, Mom." The daughter had become her caregiver towards the end and would often joke that, ironically, as you age, you become a baby again. My grandma likes to say, you start in diapers and you end in diapers. Not the patient, but the patient's kid. Mid-30s male, massive MI on Christmas Eve in his sleep. We get dispatched Christmas morning about 7 AM. I look at the PT, obviously deceased, not worth starting CPR. Eyes open and as fuzzy as old tennis balls. As my partner and I are departing the scene, the patient's 6 or 7-year-old son turns to his mother and asks, "Mommy, is daddy ever going to wake up?" This was Christmas of 1986, and I will never, ever forget that. Supposedly my uncle's last words were, "When I wake up, somebody go get me Fig Newtons." He died on the surgery table due to massive complications from pancreatic cancer. The surgery was only going to prolong the inevitable. When Rodney Dangerfield went in for his heart surgery and somebody asked how long he would be in the hospital, he said something like, "If it goes well, a couple days. If it doesn't go well, about an hour and a half." Unfortunately it didn't go well. RIP Rodney. He has my respect. Please dear God take me, please make it fricking stop, please looks at me, why won't you fricking let him take me, make it stop. His screams haunt my nightmares. Poor guy, and also I'm sorry for you for being there. That was stupid, really stupid. I hope my kids will forgive me. A guy we picked up who had shot himself on accident and died of his wounds. That breaks my heart. Tell Irene she's a fricking bee. That was said to my brother by a guy who died in a car accident he responded to. He said the guy's wife was not named Irene, not that he was going to tell her, so it just confused him. Relative told me about how they were in Iraq on patrol at Christmas and how an IED trap blew up on a guy that bled out, talking how he would never see his new baby's eyes. One of the guys from my high school was killed in Iraq by an IED. He had married his girlfriend before he left and she had been pregnant for about 3 months or so before he was deployed. I imagine if he didn't die instantly, that's probably what he was thinking too. It's something I have seen in the civilian world and with the toughest of the tough military people, asking for their mothers. Not a first responder, but an anesthesiologist. The ones that always stick with me are when a patient is scared before a big case like a cardiac bypass surgery and looking for reassurance. You tell them all you're going to take great care of them, and you do. Sometimes though, they never wake up or come off the bypass pump despite your best efforts. Pretty depressing knowing their last words after decades of life are asking for reassurance and you tell them you'll do your best, only for your best to not be good enough to top Mother Nature. Volunteer at a hospice clinic in my town in the butterfly ward. It's a ward for people with less than a month for children ages 0-18. Where Sire, I wanna say goodbye. Please let me see Sire. Sire is my German shepherd that accompanied me most days, but she hurt her paw that morning on a walk and this kid, 6 years old, had fallen in love with her. I felt freaking horrible. Oh god, this one right here. Kids and dogs. And I lost my German shepherd who was the love of my life, and my name is Sage. Be right back. Gonna bawl my tear ducts right out of my eyes. Help my baby, she's in the backseat. I looked at a quarter-mile of debris and could not even tell where the backseat was. I looked down and there 3 feet in front of me was a little arm. I just dropped to my knees and everything kind of slows down and I hear them saying the woman was gone and I'm just looking at this little arm with the nails painted pink. I took 3 months off after that and seriously considered quitting until I was called to testify against the father in court. She was trying to leave. He chased her and ran her off the road, and this man walked away with 17 stitches while only pieces of his daughter were found in the wreckage. On intake to the city jail, after he was released from the hospital hours later, he was laughing and flirting with the officer taking his mugshot. It took everything I had to remain professional and not break that prick's neck. In court it came out he'd been married before and the family of 5 was killed in a suspicious car wreck in which the brake lines were cut and he received a $250,000 life insurance payout and failed to pay for his wife and children's burial. It's the only time in my entire life I honestly thought about how I could get away with murder. That little girl's name was Amber. She'd be 22 this year. Please tell me that piece of crap went to prison for a long time. Tell my wife I love her, said on the radio by a dying firefighter in Chaz SC at Sofa Superstore Fire the 18th of June 07. I'll never forget it. Sounds like yesterday. Oh Jesus. I love you. The spouse laid his hand on our patient's foot as we were locking the stretcher in place and said this. She died en route to the hospital. I hope if I am on my deathbed this is the last thing I can say to someone. Anyone. What a beautiful thing for your last words. I was a firefighter EMT, basic, company officer, and the paramedics from my firehouse were on the way. After being called by radio, mother had delivered at home, alone, and was suffering severe postpartum bleeding. My crew was attending the newborn who seemed to be doing okay. Umbilical was clamped and baby, girl, was being kept warm. All around mom, it looked like there was enough blood to fill a kitchen sink. Her BP was the lowest I had ever seen in a conscious person. Mother, will you pray with me? I never pray. I've been an atheist since preteen years. We prayed. She did. I held her hand. She whispered her prayers. So I never actually heard her say anything else before transferring her care to my paramedics. By the time we loaded both patients into the med rig, Mom was unconscious and intubated. My paramedics didn't get back to the firehouse for several hours because they caught a couple more radio calls. It was something like 3:30 AM when I learned that mom had died on the way to the hospital. Hey man, thank you for holding her hand even though you don't believe. That small gesture was a world full of comfort to her. Not EMT, but the last words from my dad, who was recovering from multiple heart attacks in a hospital in Atlanta. I was at work in Florida, were. It's really icy up here. Don't come up. I'll worry about you on the roads. I'll come down there to recover. Promise. I love you buddy. Bye. I could have made it. He died 8 hours later from a massive heart attack. I was 22. He was 56. I'm now 45. I missed the good years. The friend years. The adult years. Tell your parents you love them. Lots. Oh wow. I'm sorry. Just don't beat yourself up about how you didn't get there. You didn't know. And you were loved. 3rd month as a new EMT. Responded to man. 41. Who had a syncopal episode. We got there and the man was a OX4 and said he was fine. Man decided to take a ride anyway. About 5 minutes out from the hospital I called the to give a report. Patient was fine. Comfortably resting. No pain. Vitals were stable. Not even 2 seconds after I hang up the man looks at me and says I feel like I can't breathe. Man was at an O2 sat of 98% on room air. Then he looks me straight in the eye and says, my chest hurts. Like a lot. I asked him what would he rate the pain. He said a 5/10. Then his eyes roll to the back of his head. He goes limp. Had cadets start CPR. He'd advised no shock. Continued to work the code even in the air. He never made it. The worst part of this ordeal, the patient's wife was in the front seat and heard and saw everything. In the air, the doctor was angry with me that I called and said he was stable and delivered him a CPR in progress. He made me go out to the waiting room and tell the family he passed. Worst feeling of my life. I still think about that man every day at some point. TL. DR. 5/10. Honestly, as a current firefighter EMT, former combat medic, 8404 FMF corpsman up, I can say people are pretty freaking dialed into their body. If someone says, I'm going to die, and they aren't obviously having an anxiety attack or smoking some dank crap, you better freaking listen. But what really piques my ears is when people say, I'm cold, or the more telling I'm thirsty. They are circling the drain at that point and need advanced surgical care, ASAP. Cold always is tough because you know it's from blood loss. Will get buried. Don't care. This stuff has haunted me for a long time. Current FFEMT. I don't really recall any crazy last words. When you're working on a PT you tend to filter out a lot of the background noise. But these two have stuck with me for a while and probably will forever. First one was a female, 9 months pregnant, altered lock. We get on scene. She looks at me and my crew and says take care of him then codes. Holy balls. We work the code, get to the trauma bays, wheel her in, and as I'm still pumping her chest OB does an emergency C-section. They work the newborn, land a helicopter on the pad for transport, and it's just a whirlwind. Mother was called pretty much right after, and we learned the newborn was called in the air. We did everything we could, everything right, and they both still passed. As a dad, it killed me. The other one, the one that keeps me up at night, was the male PT that wrapped his truck around a steel pole. This caused a fuel leak that engulfed the passenger compartment. We got on scene early enough in the rescue to hear him scream, get the hearse tools out, and watch him die before I could get the A-post off his pinned legs. The extrication took 20 minutes after that because of how mangled everything was. But watching a man burn to death is forever burned into my brain. Those screams will never go away. One of my classmates in nursing school died in a car fire. One of my other classmates was the 911 dispatcher and she heard the screaming. I've been burned on purpose before and I never want to hear it from someone else. It's horrifying. I can't describe it, but it's awful. If I'm facing a death by fire, just shoot me. Client -78 post-stroke with zeros language. He couldn't do anything but make noises and point. We had run-ins over the years with his behavioral issues, including predatorial sexual advances on male patients. End stage renal failure and I was trying to give him ice cream. As a diabetic he loved it. Grabbed me hand and looked me and said done. Honestly to this day I have trouble believing he said it, but then he closed his eyes and never regained consciousness. One of the days I cried in the break room. 78-year-old female at a nursing home. She was having a massive MI. We were the BLS crew, with a paramedic specialist meeting us on scene. I was a paramedic student at the time and the specialist was in the back of the ambulance with me. The patient knew what was happening and we could tell she was in a lot of pain. She kept refusing any form of painkiller because she didn't want to be a bother. She later died in the hospital. Oof, that one hurt. Thanks for sharing. We had a cardiac arrest in the back of the ambulance. He came around for half a second and said, "Could I please have another pillow?" Then he died. RN here. I was pushing meds to intubate a lady. She asked me if she was going to wake up after and I said yes. She didn't, and I knew she wouldn't. Similar event. The patient told me he trusted me to wake him up. He didn't either. For what it's worth, I would totally want my nurse to reassure me even if it was lies. But I'm sure it is very tough on you. Not an EMT or a paramedic, I am a cleaner in a care home where the elderly folks die somewhat often. There was this guy on ground floor, rather friendly and likes to chat. I was cleaning his room one day and asked if he was alright. He nodded, smiled and put his thumbs up. Next time I was in I heard he died. It made me happy, sad that this guy died being happy. I don't feel so good. My paramedic partner got on scene of a call and said a man was pinned between two cars but was still stable and talking. Said it was like a 6/10 pain after meds administered. They were about to fly out a surgeon and do a bilateral leg field amputation when he looked at them and said, "I don't feel so good," before slumping over. At the hospital with my mom before she passed of respiratory failure. I was sobbing next to her bed in the ER and asked if she was okay. She said, "I'm okay, but you're not." She started crashing after that and didn't make it. She was always putting her kids first. 3. I'm sorry for your loss. EMT. The mother said, "I don't want him. Take him. I'm signing away my rights." She was talking about her well-behaved son when we picked him up from a parent-teacher meeting. Not a paramedic or EMT, but crap, I gotta get this off my chest. Iraq. 2009. Couple of different times on radio watch. Basically just sitting and listening for anything of note on the comms. Heard a call go out for a medevac. Not even 2 minutes later, the status of the casualty changed. I could hear the emotion in the RTO's tone. Went from "Hey, hurry the frick up" to just flat, "Dust off one, status change. Mark as Kia." Another time a call went out for a medevac. The RTO was calm as could be, but in the background, I could hear this kid freaking begging while the medics were doing everything they could and the RTO and medevac station were coordinating. Last thing I heard from the kid was, "Thanks, Doc." I looked up the guy's battle roster number, and he was only 19. It's been 10 years, and I still hear these transmissions in my freaking sleep. I've only ever told 2 people about them, just marked them in my radio log, with the battle roster numbers, and tried to forget. It never gets easier, man. Every time I talk to old buddies about crap, it's like you get put right back in time. My last conversation with my dad was when I was very young. He died when I was 9. 2 days before he died I sent him a lot of text messages and deleted them from my mom's phone and also called him a couple of times. He called back mad because I had been annoying him. At least we said "I love you" at the end of the call. He probably had no idea he was going to die. People can be mean, dismissive or just jerks in everyday life, but he probably wouldn't have been if he knew that would be your last interaction. I'm sorry this happened to you. I had a patient that was in an explosion. Asked me if he could call his mom so he could talk to her one last time. 10+ years ago and it still gets to me. Really not words that bothered me the most. Was called to a store for a woman having seizures, and when we arrived we found an attractive middle-aged woman as the patient. She was a cancer patient that had been in remission, and with the seizures, clearly the cancer had returned and spread to her brain. I collected the required information and gave the inbound hospital report as quickly and quietly as possible. The woman was absolutely quiet, and tears were streaming down her face as she considered her life sentence. I did my best to maintain for the trip to the hospital, gave my report to the receiving nurse, and went outside and cried myself. As a paramedic, you learn to accept injuries, illness, destruction and death, but there are some things touching your heart you can't process. EMR here. Got called to a code with one of our AEMTs. CPR in progress. Husband doing compressions on his unresponsive wife. Slap on the Lucas. And I'm bagging while the A is eyeing her leg. While bagging, her right eyelid opened and she was fixed and dilated. At some point, her husband said, "This is bad, isn't it?" And I'll never forget the tone of his voice. It seemed so distant. He knew. We worked her all the way to the hospital. She never made it. Not an EMT, but supposedly my grandpa's last words to his live-in girlfriend was, "You just killed me," right before he bled to death after she stabbed him. This was said by her during the trial. As a 911 call taker dispatcher prior to working for the FD, I'm going to turn it on, then it'll be over. By turn it on, the caller was referring to a skill saw in his garage. He hung up the phone, turned on the skill saw, and lowered his wrists over the spinning blade to kill himself. He was dead before responders arrived. A couple of weeks later, I also took the call from his wife, who was angry about what a mess the garage still was and how long we were keeping the saw in evidence, and proceeded to just generally complain about her dead husband. It was a bizarre few weeks. Not a paramedic, just first on the scene after a head-on collision. Car versus truck. Driver of the car was pinned in his vehicle, bleeding heavily from a broken femur, bone showing. We were miles from the nearest town. The ambulance took 20 minutes to arrive. I held his hand the whole time, kneeling on the pavement, my pants soaking wet from his blood dripping out the bottom of the door. The whole time he kept saying, "My dog, is my dog okay? You have to help my dog." His dog, in the backseat, was by some miracle completely unhurt, just very scared. The guy lost consciousness shortly before the ambulance got there and died en route to the hospital. Please tell me you or someone took the dog. One of my biggest fears is that I'll die with no one to care for my pup. I was transporting a young psychiatric patient who was being transferred to a long-term mental care facility. He was especially prone to fits of extreme violence. He had attacked his teacher and some classmate quit badly, and we were moving him out of state to a secure facility. He was doped up, like hospital cocktail doped up, at least according to the ED. Discharge paperwork. We went over a bridge, and when we bumped on the expansion joints he woke a little. I held my breath as I watched a fly buzz around and land in his face. This kid's eyes popped open and he started yelling at me that he was gonna get out of here and ain't no one gonna lock me up. I told him we were on a bridge and he wasn't going anywhere even if he did escape. He was struggling so violently he worked his way out of the restraints. Where I live we are limited in the type of restraining that is allowed in an ambulance. This kid looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "You ever kill anybody before?" Taken a bit aback by the question, I responded, "I know." To which he responded with, "Well then I guess I'm safe," and started swinging. An all-out brawl between him and I exploded in the back of the ambulance, and I had my partner go lights and sirens to the psych hospital and to notify local PD of the incident. Honestly, it's that question, "You ever kill anyone before?" He knew exactly how far he was willing to fight to escape. He knew exactly what he wanted and was willing to fight pretty freaking hard for it. It's so real every time I remember it. It's surreal. Like he must have picked us up out of a movie or something. Normal people don't equate not dying and being safe. It honestly in the moment was horror movie creepy. I had a 9-year-old accidental victim of a drive-by shooting ask me if he was going to die. A 9-year-old should never have to ask that question of anybody. This is a fricked up world. Although we don't often get closure on our runs, I do believe that he made it. We had him stabilized and he seemed like he was going to make it when we got him to the stab room. I had a patient that was having a massive steamy heart attack. He was completely soaked in sweat and had 10/10 chest pain. We got to the ER and as we were rolling him in he was pleading with me to help me. At that moment he codes and we were unable to get him back. Also had a patient who in an accident on a motorcycle versus a pickup truck. We had him in the back of the truck waiting on the helicopter. Being in a rural area, we are 50 minutes from a trauma center with lights and sirens. The patient was complaining of being short of breath and leg pain. He had a dismembered foot along with diminished lung sounds. The patient was alert and oriented the entire time until the helicopter landed. As the flight medics got on the truck, the patient started saying over and over, "I can't breathe, don't let me go." Within a minute the patient went into traumatic arrest and we were unable to get him back. The patient's wife was riding next to him at the time of the crash and was in the front of the truck when her husband passed. Seeing her face in the window between the compartments is something I will never forget. OMG, that's haunting. This story hurts to tell. I wasn't an EMT, but I'm CPR certified. I witnessed a hit and run about 10 years back. The guy was hit by a car while crossing the crosswalk and I happened to be walking by. I quickly got out my flip phone and started calling 911. The driver got out his vehicle to check on him, but as soon as he saw me he got back in his car and drove away. I went to check on the guy, but he seemed to be bleeding really bad from the skull. I told 911 the streets and that the guy had been hit by a car. I went to see if there was anything I can do for him, but he just looked at me and asked, "Is this the end?" He slipped away pretty quickly. Nothing I could do. I don't really remember the rest of the night. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.